The year was 1872, when Abigail Zimmerman's life changed forever. As swiftly and unexpectedly as the rushing waters of the Big Horn River that nearly claimed her that fateful spring afternoon. Her scream had caught in her throat as the crumbling earth disappeared beneath her feet, her body suspended for one terrifying moment before gravity pulled her toward the churning rapids below. Abigail had come west from Boston just 3 months prior, following the death of her father and the subsequent discovery that his gambling debts had left her with nothing but a deed to a small plot of land in Wyoming Territory. At 22, with no prospects and no family remaining in Boston, she had packed her meager belongings and boarded a westbound train with little more than hope and determination to sustain her. The land her father had acquired in a poker game years earlier turned out to be a small cabin with a vegetable garden nestled near the foothills of the Bighorn Mountains. It was nothing like the elegant townhouse she had grown up in, but it was hers, and Abigail was determined to make it work. She had been foraging for wild berries along the riverbank that afternoon, her basket half full when disaster struck. As she plummeted toward the icy water, a strong hand shot out, grasping her wrist with iron determination. Abigail's body slammed against the eroding riverbank, knocking the breath from her lungs as mud and rocks cascaded around her. "I've got you, don't move," a deep voice commanded from above. Abigail looked up into the most striking blue eyes she had ever seen, set in a sun-bronzed face beneath a worn leather hat. The cowboy lay flat on his stomach, one arm extended down to her, his other hand clutching a tree root for anchorage, the ground still giving way. "Don't struggle," he instructed, his voice calm despite the urgency of the situation. "I'm going to pull you up, but I need you to stay as still as possible." Abigail nodded, too terrified to speak. She could feel the earth continuing to crumble beneath her feet as the river lapped hungrily at her skirts. The current was strong, and she knew if she fell in, it would carry her away in an instant. With methodical strength, the cowboy began to pull her upward. Abigail could see the muscles in his forearm straining beneath his rolled-up sleeve. Inch by agonizing inch, he drew her higher until finally she was able to grab onto solid ground with her free hand. "That's it," he encouraged. "Almost there." With one final heave, he pulled her over the edge of the bank and onto safe ground. They collapsed together on the grass, both breathing heavily from the exertion. It was only then that Abigail realized her basket of berries was gone, sacrificed to the river. "Thank you," she gasped when she finally found her voice. "You saved my life." The cowboy sat up, adjusting his hat. "Lucas Zander," he introduced himself, extending a calloused hand. "Folks just call me Luke." "Abigail Zimmerman," she replied, taking his hand briefly. "I'm much obliged to you, Mr. Zander." Luke stood and helped her to her feet. "That bank's been eroding all spring, not safe to get so close." His eyes, the color of a cloudless Wyoming sky, assessed her with undisguised curiosity. "You're that Eastern girl who moved into Old Man Harrington's cabin, aren't you?" Abigail brushed dirt from her skirts, embarrassed by her disheveled appearance. "Yes, I inherited the property from my father. I've been here since February." "Alone?" Luke asked, surprise evident in his tone. "Yes," she answered, lifting her chin slightly. "I can manage quite well on my own, thank you." A small smile tugged at the corner of Luke's mouth. "I don't doubt your determination, Miss Zimmerman, but these parts can be unforgiving, especially for someone not raised to their ways." Before Abigail could form a suitably indignant response, Luke glanced at the sky. "Sun's getting low. I'd be happy to escort you home. These woods aren't the safest place for a lady to be wandering alone, especially as evening approaches." Abigail wanted to refuse to prove her independence, but common sense prevailed. She was shaken from her near drowning, covered in mud and without her berries. "That would be appreciated, Mr. Zander." Luke whistled, and a magnificent chestnut horse trotted out from between the trees. "This is Rusty," he said, patting the animal's neck affectionately. He mounted in one fluid motion, then extended his hand down to her. "Your cabin's about 3 miles from here, isn't it?" Abigail hesitated. Riding with a stranger, especially in such close proximity, went against everything she'd been taught about proper behavior. But she was far from Boston now, and her feet were already sore from her day's foraging. "I promise I'm harmless," Luke said, reading her hesitation. Just trying to be neighborly." With a resigned nod, Abigail took his hand and allowed him to pull her up behind him. She settled awkwardly onto the horse, unsure where to place her hands. "You'll want to hold on," Luke advised as Rusty began to move, "unless you fancy another tumble today." Reluctantly, Abigail placed her hands lightly on Luke's sides. As soon as the horse picked up speed, however, she found herself clutching tighter, her arms encircling his waist. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his cotton shirt, smell the scent of leather and pine that clung to him. They rode in silence for a while, Abigail acutely aware of the impropriety of their situation, yet unable to deny the security she felt in his presence. "What brings you to Wyoming Territory, Miss Zimmerman?" Luke finally asked, his voice carrying easily back to her. "Most Eastern ladies I've encountered wouldn't trade city life for a frontier cabin." Abigail considered how much to reveal. "Necessity more than choice, Mr. Zander. My father passed away and this property was all I had left." "I'm sorry for your loss," he said, his voice softening. "And please call me Luke. Mr. Zander was my father and I never much cared for the man." The frankness of his statement startled Abigail into a small laugh. "Then you must call me Abigail," she responded, surprising herself with the offer of familiarity. As they approached her cabin, Abigail felt an unexpected reluctance to end their journey. There had been precious little human interaction in her life since arriving in Wyoming, and despite the circumstances of their meeting, Luke's company was not unwelcome. The cabin came into view, its small porch adorned with the potted flowers Abigail had brought from a trading post in the nearest town. She had done her best to make the rustic structure feel like home, hanging curtains in the windows and keeping everything meticulously clean. Luke drew Rusty to a halt and dismounted, then reached up to help Abigail down. His hand spanned her waist easily as he lifted her, setting her gently on her feet. For a moment they stood close, his hands lingering slightly longer than necessary. "Thank you again," Abigail said, stepping back and smoothing her skirts, "for rescuing me and seeing me home safely." Luke nodded, his eyes taking in the neat cabin and garden. "You've done well with this place. Old Harrington let it go to seed before he passed. Did you know him?" Abigail asked, curious about the previous owner of her home. "Everyone within 30 miles knew Harrington," Luke replied with a small smile. "Crankiest prospector in the territory, but fair in his dealings." Abigail hesitated, then made a decision. "Would you care for some coffee?" "It seems a poor repayment for saving my life, but I just put a pot on the stove before I left this morning." Luke glanced at the position of the sun, then nodded. "I'd be obliged. My ranch is still an hour's ride, and a cup of coffee would sit well before the journey." Abigail led the way into her small cabin, suddenly self-conscious about its humble appearance. The main room served as both kitchen and living area, with a single bedroom partitioned off in the back. A stone fireplace dominated one wall, and her few books were arranged neatly on a shelf beside it. "Please sit," she offered, gesturing to one of the 2 chairs at her small table while she moved to the cast-iron stove. The coffee had been sitting all day and was strong enough to stand a spoon in, but she poured 2 cups anyway. Luke removed his hat as he entered, revealing thick sandy brown hair that curled slightly at the ends. He sat at the table, looking somewhat too large for the delicate chair Abigail had brought with her from Boston. "Sugar?" she asked, placing a cup before him. "No, thank you, black is fine." Abigail sat across from him, cradling her own cup. The silence between them stretched, not uncomfortable but expectant, as if each was waiting for the other to determine what came next. "How large is your ranch?" Abigail finally asked, seeking neutral ground for conversation. 2,000 acres, Luke answered, his pride evident. "Started with just 200 and built it up over the last 6 years. Got about 500 head of cattle now." "That's impressive," Abigail said sincerely. "You must work very hard." Luke shrugged. "It's a good life, if not an easy one. The Z ranch keeps me busy from sunup to sundown most days." Z, Abigail repeated. "For Zander, that's right. My brand's 2 Z's with a bar between them." He smiled slightly. "Not the most creative name, but it's mine. And do you manage it alone?" Abigail asked, immediately regretting the question when she realized how it might sound like she was inquiring about his marital status. If Luke noticed her discomfort, he didn't show it. "Got 3 ranch hands who live in the bunkhouse. Good men, all of them." And a cook who's been with me since I started. Old Hank can make the toughest beef taste like it came from a fine Boston restaurant. He paused, studying her over the rim of his cup. And you, planning to work this land alone? Abigail straightened her shoulders. I've managed to plant a vegetable garden that's coming along nicely. I sell eggs from my chickens in town when I go for supplies, and I've been learning to preserve foods for the winter. Luke nodded, but concern showed in his eyes. Winter's a different beast out here than back east. Blizzards can trap you for weeks, and there are other dangers: wolves, bears, not to mention the occasional desperate drifter. Are you suggesting I can't manage? Abigail asked, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. I'm suggesting that even the most capable person needs neighbors out here, Luke replied evenly. We all rely on each other when times get tough. The Z is only an hour's ride southwest. If you ever need help, don't hesitate to send word. The sincerity in his voice softened Abigail's pride. Thank you, I appreciate that. Luke finished his coffee and stood, placing his hat back on his head. I should be going. Cattle won't feed themselves. He moved toward the door, then turned back. There's a social at the church in Clearwater this Saturday. Whole community will be there. Might be a good way for you to meet your neighbors. Abigail followed him to the door. I'll consider it. Luke mounted Rusty and tipped his hat to her. Until Saturday then, Abigail. With a click of his tongue, he urged his horse forward, leaving Abigail watching his retreating form with mixed emotions. She had not planned on attending any social gatherings. Her goal had been simple: survive, be self-sufficient, and perhaps eventually save enough money to return east. Yet as she watched Lucas Zander disappear down the trail, she found herself considering a new calico dress she'd been saving for a special occasion. The days until Saturday passed with agonizing slowness for Abigail. She found herself glancing repeatedly down the trail, half expecting to see Luke returning on some pretext. But he didn't come, and by Friday evening, Abigail had convinced herself that his invitation had been merely polite, with no real expectation that she would attend the social. Still, on Saturday morning, she drew a bath, washing her long auburn hair with special care. She spent an inordinate amount of time arranging it in a style that was both practical and flattering, with soft tendrils framing her face. The calico dress, a modest blue that complemented her hazel eyes, was pressed and ready. It was a 4-mile walk to Clearwater, and Abigail set out early, a small basket of freshly baked bread on her arm as an offering for the communal table. The day was pleasant, with a gentle breeze that carried the scent of wildflowers and pine. By the time the small settlement came into view, Abigail's initial confidence had begun to waver. These were not her people. They lived lives so different from the one she had known in Boston that they might as well be from another world. The church was a simple wooden structure with a small steeple, and already the sounds of conversation and laughter spilled from its open doors. Wagons and horses were tethered nearby, evidence of families who had traveled from outlying homesteads for the occasion. Abigail hesitated at the edge of the gathering, suddenly acutely aware of her status as an outsider. Just as she was considering turning back, a familiar voice called her name. Abigail, you came. Luke strode toward her, his face breaking into a warm smile that transformed his rugged features. He was dressed in clean denim pants and a pressed white shirt, his sandy hair tamed and his face freshly shaved. I thought some company might be welcome, Abigail replied, trying to sound casual despite the flutter in her stomach at his evident pleasure in seeing her. It is indeed, Luke said, offering his arm. Let me introduce you around. Folks have been curious about the new resident at Harrington's old place. The next few hours passed in a blur of introductions. Abigail met the town's shopkeepers, the school teacher, the preacher and his wife, and numerous ranchers and farmers from the surrounding area. To her surprise, she was welcomed warmly, with many of the women inviting her to quilting circles and offering advice on gardening in Wyoming's challenging climate. Luke stayed near her throughout, a steady presence that both reassured and unsettled her. There was something in the way he looked at her, a quiet intensity that suggested his interest went beyond mere neighborliness. As the afternoon progressed, musicians set up in one corner of the churchyard, and people began to clear a space for dancing. You dance, Abigail. Luke asked as the first notes of a fiddle filled the air. "I was taught the proper dances for Boston society," she answered, watching as couples took their places for what appeared to be a lively reel. Luke's eyes twinkled with amusement. "This might be a bit livelier than what you're used to, but I'd be honored if you joined me." Before she could formulate a reason to decline, Abigail found herself being led into the circle of dancers. The music picked up tempo, and Luke guided her through steps that were indeed more exuberant than the stately waltzes she knew. There were moments of confusion as she tried to follow the pattern, but Luke's steady hand at her waist kept her from faltering. "You're a quick learner," he said as they circled each other, his voice pitched just loud enough for her to hear over the music. "Or you're an excellent teacher," she countered, breathless from the pace. As the dance ended, Abigail became aware of several pairs of eyes watching them with interest. A pretty blonde woman approached, her gaze assessing as she looked from Luke to Abigail. "Luke Zander, aren't you going to introduce me to your friend?" she asked, her tone friendly enough, though there was something possessive in the way she placed her hand on Luke's arm. "Clara," Luke acknowledged with a nod. "This is Miss Abigail Zimmerman. She's taken over Harrington's old place. Abigail, this is Clara Wilson. Her father owns the general store." "Pleased to meet you," Abigail said, offering a smile that Clara returned with considerably less warmth. "How are you finding our little corner of Wyoming?" Clara asked. "It must be quite a change from the east." "It has its challenges," Abigail admitted, "but also unexpected pleasures." Clara's gaze flicked to Luke, then back to Abigail. "Yes, I imagine it does." "Well, I should return to helping with the food table. Perhaps we'll see more of each other, Miss Zimmerman." With a final, meaningful look at Luke, she walked away. "An old friend?" Abigail asked, trying to keep her tone light. Luke shrugged. "Clara's father and mine were business partners years ago. We grew up together." Something in his voice suggested there was more to the story, but Abigail didn't press. As the sun began to set, families started to gather their things and bid farewell. Abigail realized with a start that she had not planned for the return journey in the dark. "I should be heading back," she said to Luke, who had remained at her side for much of the afternoon. "Thank you for introducing me to everyone." "I'll escort you," Luke offered immediately. "It's not safe for you to walk back alone, especially after dark." Abigail wanted to assert her independence, but practicality won out. "That's very kind of you." They said their goodbyes, and Luke retrieved Rusty from where he was tethered. As before, he helped Abigail up behind him, but this time there was no hesitation as she wrapped her arms around his waist. The return journey was made mostly in companionable silence, the rhythm of Rusty's hooves and the sounds of the night creatures their only accompaniment. Abigail found herself resting her cheek against Luke's back, fatigue from the day's activities catching up with her. When they reached her cabin, Luke lit her lamps for her before taking his leave, promising to check on her in a few days. As Abigail watched him ride away, she realized with a sense of alarm that Luke Zander was becoming far too important to her peace of mind. Over the next several weeks, Luke made good on his promise to check on Abigail. His visits were always preceded by a polite call from outside, never presuming to enter her cabin uninvited. He brought small gifts, a sack of flour when he learned she was running low, a book of poetry he thought she might enjoy, seeds for her garden from a variety his ranch had success with. Abigail found herself looking forward to his visits, with an eagerness that both thrilled and frightened her. She had not come to Wyoming looking for attachment. Indeed, she had fled Boston partly to escape the well-meaning matchmaking attempts of family friends who pitied the newly impoverished daughter of Joshua Zimmerman. Yet there was something about Luke that broke through her carefully constructed defenses. Perhaps it was his quiet competence, or the way he respected her determination to manage on her own while still offering help when needed. Or maybe it was simply the way his blue eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled at something she said. Spring turned to summer, and Abigail's garden flourished under her attentive care. She began to feel a sense of accomplishment as her pantry shelves filled with preserved vegetables and fruits. The chickens provided a steady income through their eggs, and she had even added 3 goats to her small menagerie, using their milk for cheese and butter. One particularly hot July afternoon, Luke arrived with a small crate in his wagon. Thought you might enjoy these, he said, lifting out a box that contained 6 glass jars of honey. My bees had a good spring. You keep bees? Abigail asked, delighted by the amber liquid gleaming in the sunlight. Started 2 years ago, Luke explained as they sat in the shade of her porch. Figured it would be nice to have honey without having to trade for it. Now I've got more than I know what to do with. Thank you, Abigail said sincerely. Honey is a luxury I haven't allowed myself since coming west. They sat in comfortable silence for a moment, sipping the cold tea Abigail had prepared in anticipation of the heat. A question had been forming in her mind for days, and finally she gathered the courage to ask it. Luke, what brought you to Wyoming? You've never mentioned your life before the Z. Something shifted in Luke's expression, a subtle closing off that Abigail might not have noticed had she not become so attuned to his moods. Not much to tell, he said, his tone carefully neutral. I was born in Missouri. Father was a blacksmith who drank more than he worked. Mother died when I was 12, left home at 16 and worked my way west, cowboying on different outfits until I saved enough to stake my own claim. Abigail sensed there was more to the story but respected his reticence. It's impressive what you've built, she said instead. You should be proud. Luke's expression softened. What about you? I know you came here after your father's passing, but you've never spoken much about your life in Boston. Abigail sighed, looking out over her small garden. My father was a merchant, quite successful until the last few years of his life. My mother died when I was young, so it was just the two of us. He provided me with every advantage: good schools, music lessons, the right social introductions. She paused, the familiar pain of her father's betrayal washing over her. What I didn't know was that he had a weakness for gambling. By the time he died, everything was gone except this deed, which he had won in a poker game years ago and apparently forgotten about. So you came west with nothing but this deed? Luke asked, his voice soft with admiration. And a trunk full of impractical dresses, Abigail added with a wry smile. But yes, essentially nothing. It was either this, or become a governess or companion to some distant relative who would have taken me in out of pity. And now, do you regret your choice? Abigail considered the question seriously. There are moments when I miss certain comforts: hot running water, libraries, theaters. But no, I don't regret coming here. There's a freedom in this life that I never knew in Boston, and a satisfaction in building something with my own hands that I find I quite enjoy. Luke's smile was warm with understanding. That's the thing about the West. It strips away pretenses and lets a person discover who they truly are. Before Abigail could respond, the sound of approaching horses caught their attention. 3 riders appeared on the trail, and Abigail felt Luke tense beside her, expecting visitors. He asked, his hand moving instinctively to the revolver at his hip. No, Abigail replied, anxiety creeping into her voice. As the riders drew closer, Luke relaxed slightly. It's Henry Wilson and his boys, he said, naming the owner of the general store in Clearwater, Clara's father. Henry Wilson was a portly man with a bushy mustache who had always been polite, but reserved in Abigail's interactions with him at the store. His 2 sons, who looked to be in their late 20s, flanked him as they approached the cabin. Afternoon, Miss Zimmerman, Henry called as they reined in their horses. His eyes narrowed slightly as he noticed Luke. Zander. Luke nodded in greeting but remained silent. What brings you out this way, Mr. Wilson? Abigail asked, rising from her seat. Wilson dismounted with a grunt, handing his reins to one of his sons. Business, Miss Zimmerman. I've been meaning to speak with you about this property. Abigail frowned. My property, what about it? Wilson removed his hat, wiping sweat from his brow. I'll be direct. I'd like to buy it from you. I'll offer a fair price, enough for you to return east in comfort. Surprise rendered Abigail momentarily speechless. Luke stepped forward, his posture protective. What's your interest in this land, Wilson? It's not exactly prime grazing or farming territory. Wilson's gaze hardened as he looked at Luke. My business dealings are no concern of yours, Zander. I'm making a private offer to Miss Zimmerman. It's all right, Luke, Abigail said, finding her voice. She turned to Wilson. I appreciate your offer, Mr. Wilson, but I'm not interested in selling. I've put too much work into making this place my home to leave now. Wilson's lips thinned beneath his mustache. I urge you to reconsider, Miss Zimmerman. A young lady alone in these parts, it's not proper, and it's certainly not safe. The offer won't remain open indefinitely." There was something in his tone that sent a chill down Abigail's spine, a hint of something beneath the surface of his words that felt almost threatening. Luke stepped closer to Abigail, his presence solid and reassuring at her side. "I believe Miss Zimmerman has given you her answer, Wilson. She's not alone out here, she has neighbors who look out for her." Wilson's eyes flicked between them, calculation evident in his gaze. "I see. Well, perhaps you'll change your mind in time, Miss Zimmerman. The offer stands for now." He replaced his hat and remounted his horse with difficulty. "Good day to you both." The three men rode away, and Abigail let out a breath she hadn't realized she was holding. "That was odd. I can't imagine why he would want this land." Luke was watching the retreating riders with a frown. "Neither can I, and that worries me." "Wilson's not known for making investments without a clear profit in mind." "Do you think I should be concerned?" Abigail asked, the peaceful afternoon now tainted with unease. "I think you should be cautious," Luke replied. "I don't like to speak ill of anyone, but Wilson has a reputation for getting what he wants, one way or another." He turned to her, decision forming in his eyes. "I'd feel better if you weren't out here alone for a while. Would you consider staying in town, perhaps with the preacher's wife?" Abigail shook her head firmly. "This is my home, Luke. I won't be frightened away by vague implications." Luke looked as if he wanted to argue, but instead nodded reluctantly. "Then at least accept a gift from me." He moved to his wagon and returned with a shotgun. "Do you know how to use one of these?" "My father taught me to shoot a rifle when I was 15, Abigail said, taking the weapon with more confidence than she felt. "Said every woman should know how to defend herself." "Smart man," Luke commented. "This is loaded. Keep it by your bed at night and near you during the day." He hesitated, then added, "I'll try to ride by more often, and I'll send one of my hands to check on you when I can't make it myself." Abigail wanted to protest that she didn't need a guardian, but the concern in Luke's eyes touched her. "Thank you," she said simply. Before he left, Luke lingered on the porch, seeming reluctant to leave her alone. "Abigail," he began, then stopped, as if unsure of his words. "Yes," she prompted, suddenly aware of how close they were standing. He shook his head, then to her surprise, reached out to touch her cheek gently. "Be safe," he finally said, his voice rough with emotion. After he rode away, Abigail stood on the porch for a long time, the shotgun in her hands and the memory of his touch burning on her skin. True to his word, Luke increased his visits over the next few weeks. Sometimes he came himself, sometimes he sent one of his ranch hands, a quiet Mexican called Miguel, or a young cowboy named Jasper who blushed furiously whenever Abigail offered him coffee. She would have resented the surveillance if not for the genuine concern behind it, and if she were honest with herself, she enjoyed the company. August arrived with blistering heat that withered crops and dried streambeds to dusty ribbons. Abigail's well remained strong, but she watched the water level with growing concern. Her garden required constant attention to keep it from succumbing to the drought. It was during this difficult time that Abigail realized her feelings for Luke had grown far beyond friendship or gratitude. She found herself watching for him each day, her heart quickening at the sight of a rider on the horizon, disappointment washing over her when it wasn't him. His rare absences left her restless and distracted, and when he was present, she was acutely aware of his every movement, every change of expression. One evening, as dusk painted the sky in shades of pink and gold, Luke arrived unexpectedly. Abigail was in her garden, coaxing wilting tomato plants back to life with precious water from her well. "You're working too hard in this heat," Luke called as he dismounted. Abigail straightened, pushing a strand of hair from her damp forehead. "The plants won't water themselves," she replied with a tired smile. Luke approached, his expression serious. "Abigail, I need to talk to you about something." He gestured to her porch. "Could we sit for a moment?" Alarm fluttered in Abigail's chest at his tone. "Of course," she said, setting down her watering can and leading the way to the porch chairs. Luke removed his hat, turning it in his hands, a nervous gesture she had never seen from him before. "I've learned something about Wilson's interest in your land," he began without preamble. "What is it?" Abigail asked, leaning forward. "There are rumors that the railroad is planning to extend a spur line through this area, connecting to the main line at Clearwater. If true, the value of land along the proposed route would increase tenfold." Abigail's mind raced. And Wilson believes my property is in the path of this railroad, Luke nodded. That's my guess. He's been buying up parcels all through this valley over the past year. Yours is one of the few he doesn't control. How did you discover this? Abigail asked, processing the implications. I have a friend who works for the territorial government in Cheyenne. He confirmed the railroad's interest in the region, though the exact route hasn't been finalized. Abigail sat back, considering this new information. So if I sell to Wilson now, I'd be giving up a potentially valuable piece of land for far less than it might be worth. That's assuming the railroad does come through here, Luke cautioned. Nothing's certain yet. Abigail's mind was already working through the possibilities. If the rumors proved true, she could sell the land to the railroad directly for a substantial profit enough to return east and establish herself comfortably, perhaps even start a small business of her own. Yet the thought of leaving Wyoming, of leaving Luke, created an unexpected ache in her chest. When had this wild territory, with its harsh beauty and demanding ways, become more home to her than Boston ever was? What would you do? She asked Luke, genuinely wanting his opinion. He was silent for a long moment, his blue eyes troubled as they met hers. I can't answer that for you, Abigail. It's your land, your future. But you must have thoughts on the matter, she pressed. Luke sighed, running a hand through his hair. Honestly, part of me wants to tell you to hold onto the land, to stay here where he stopped, seeming to catch himself, but that would be selfish of me. If you want to return east, this could be your opportunity. The unfinished thought hung between them, and Abigail's heart beat faster at what he might have been about to say. And if I don't want to return east? She asked quietly. Luke's gaze intensified, searching her face as if looking for confirmation of something he dared not hope for. Then I'd say hold onto your land and see what comes of these railroad rumors. Either way, you'd be securing your future. Abigail nodded, her decision already forming. I think that's wise advice. I've worked too hard here to walk away now, especially for an uncertain return. Relief flickered across Luke's features before he schooled his expression. Wilson won't be pleased, he warned. Mr. Wilson's pleasure is not my concern, Abigail replied with more confidence than she felt. This is my home now, and I intend to stay. Luke smiled then, a genuine smile that reached his eyes and made them crinkle at the corners in the way that always caused Abigail's breath to catch. I'm glad to hear it, he said simply, but his tone conveyed much more. As he prepared to leave, Luke hesitated on the edge of the porch steps. There's a harvest dance in Clearwater next month, he said, his tone carefully casual. I was wondering if you might allow me to escort you. Abigail's heart leapt at the formal nature of his request, so different from his invitation to the church social. This felt like a declaration of intent, a public acknowledgement of whatever was growing between them. I would like that very much, she replied, hoping her voice didn't betray her excitement. Luke's smile widened. Good, that's good. He settled his hat back on his head and mounted Rusty. I'll see you soon, Abigail. As she watched him ride away, Abigail hugged herself against the evening chill, a sense of anticipation warming her from within despite the worry that still lingered about Wilson's intentions. The next morning dawned hot and cloudless, promising another scorching day. Abigail rose early, determined to complete her chores before the worst of the heat descended. She was feeding the chickens when she heard the sound of approaching horses. Setting down the feed bucket, she reached for the shotgun she now kept near her at all times. She relaxed slightly when she recognized Henry Wilson, but tensed again at the sight of 6 men accompanying him, including his 2 sons. Good morning, Mr. Wilson, she called, keeping her voice steady as she stepped onto her porch, the shotgun held loosely but visibly at her side. This is quite a delegation for such an early hour. Wilson dismounted, his face set in grim lines. Miss Zimmerman, I've come to make you a final offer for your property, $500 more than generous for a piece of land this size. Abigail's grip tightened on the shotgun. As I told you before, Mr. Wilson, I'm not interested in selling. Wilson's face reddened beneath his mustache. I think you'll find it in your best interest to reconsider, young lady. A woman alone can face many difficulties in these parts: fires, rustlers, all manner of accidents. The threat was thinly veiled, and Abigail felt a chill despite the morning heat. Are you threatening me, Mr. Wilson? Simply stating facts, Miss Zimmerman, he replied, his tone hard. $500 is my final offer. Take it and be on the eastbound train by week's end, or face the consequences of your stubbornness. Abigail raised the shotgun slightly, not pointing it directly at Wilson but making her meaning clear. I believe you should leave now, Mr. Wilson. This conversation is over. Wilson's face contorted with anger. You'll regret this decision, Miss Zimmerman, mark my words. He turned to remount his horse, gesturing for his men to follow. As they rode away, Abigail's hands began to shake. She lowered the shotgun, her mind racing. Wilson's threats were not to be taken lightly, especially with Luke's ranch an hour away and her nearest neighbors even further. For the remainder of the day, Abigail kept the shotgun close as she worked, jumping at every sound from the surrounding woods. By evening, her nerves were frayed, and she barred her door early, checking and rechecking that all windows were securely latched. Sleep eluded her as she lay in bed, straining to hear any unusual sounds outside. It was well past midnight when exhaustion finally claimed her, pulling her into a fitful slumber filled with dreams of fire and faceless men. She awoke to the smell of smoke. For a confused moment, Abigail thought it was part of her dream, but the acrid scent burning her nostrils was all too real. She leapt from bed, grabbing her robe and the shotgun in one motion. The main room of the cabin was still clear, but when she approached the door, she could see an orange glow through the window. Heart pounding, she peered outside and gasped in horror. Her chicken coop was ablaze, and the dry grass around it was quickly catching fire, creating a path that would soon reach the cabin. Abigail threw open the door and rushed outside, the heat of the fire hitting her like a physical blow. The chickens were squawking in panic, trapped inside the burning structure. Without thinking, Abigail ran to the well and began drawing water, knowing even as she did that it was futile one bucket against a fire that was spreading with terrifying speed. As she turned to carry the first bucket to the coop, movement at the edge of her property caught her eye. Several mounted figures watched from the shadow of the trees, their faces indistinct in the darkness, but their presence unmistakable. Fury replaced Abigail's fear. She dropped the bucket and raised the shotgun, firing a warning shot into the air. The figures retreated into the trees, but Abigail knew they wouldn't go far. They were waiting to see their handiwork completed. With grim determination, she turned back to the task of saving what she could. The coop was beyond salvation, but she might still save her cabin if she acted quickly. Bucket after bucket, she fought the advancing flames, her arms aching and her lungs burning from the smoke. The fire had nearly reached her porch when she heard the thunder of approaching hooves. For a terrifying moment, she thought Wilson's men had returned to finish what they started, but then a familiar voice called out her name. Abigail. Luke galloped into the yard, followed by two of his ranch hands. Without hesitation, they dismounted and joined the battle against the flames, their experienced hands working with an efficiency that gave Abigail hope. With their help, the fire was contained before it could reach the cabin, though the chicken coop was reduced to smoldering ruins and a portion of her garden was scorched beyond recovery. As dawn broke, Abigail sat heavily on her porch steps, exhaustion and despair washing over her. Luke sat beside her, his face and clothes blackened with soot, his eyes fierce as he surveyed the damage. "Wilson," he said, not a question but a statement. Abigail nodded tiredly. "He came yesterday with an ultimatum: sell or face the consequences. I saw riders watching from the trees when the fire started." Luke's jaw tightened, a muscle pulsing beneath his skin. "This isn't the end of it. He won't stop until he gets what he wants." "What am I to do?" Abigail asked, hating the note of defeat in her voice but too exhausted to mask it. "I can't keep fighting fire after fire." Luke turned to her, taking her hands in his. They were both filthy, covered in soot and sweat, but he held her gently as if she were made of porcelain. "Come to the Z-Bar Z," he said. "Stay there while we sort this out." Abigail shook her head. "If I leave, he wins. This is my home, Luke. I won't be driven from it by threats and intimidation." Admiration and frustration warred in Luke's expression. "Your courage is remarkable, Abigail, but this isn't about standing your ground anymore. It's about your safety." He hesitated, then continued in a softer voice, "I couldn't bear it if anything happened to you." The raw emotion in his words pierced through Abigail's exhaustion. She looked up at him, seeing the worry etched in the lines of his face, the fear for her that he couldn't conceal. "Luke," she began, but he shook his head, cutting her off. "I need to say something, and I know this isn't the right time or place, but seeing your cabin in flames, thinking you might be hurt or worse," he took a deep breath. "I care for you, Abigail, more than I've ever cared for anyone. The thought of losing you terrifies me." Abigail's heart swelled despite their dire circumstances. "I care for you too, Luke. These past months you've become essential to me." A smile broke through the grime on Luke's face, transforming it despite the exhaustion evident in every line. He leaned forward slowly, giving her time to pull away if she wished, but Abigail met him halfway, their lips meeting in a kiss that was gentle yet filled with promise. When they parted, Luke pressed his forehead to hers. "Please come to the ranch," he whispered. "Not because you're giving up, but because it's the smart, tactical decision. We'll figure out how to deal with Wilson together." Put that way, as a strategic retreat rather than a surrender, Abigail found herself nodding agreement. "All right," she conceded. "But only until we can ensure this property is safe." Luke's relief was palpable. "Pack what you need. We'll leave as soon as you're ready." As Abigail gathered her most essential possessions, her mind was a whirlwind of emotions: anger at Wilson, sorrow for the destruction of her hard work, fear for what might come next, and beneath it all, a strange, quiet joy at Luke's declaration. In the midst of chaos, they had found each other, and that knowledge gave her strength to face whatever lay ahead. The Z Ranch was larger and more established than Abigail had imagined. The main house was a substantial two-story structure built of logs and stone, with a wide porch wrapping around three sides. Several outbuildings, including a bunkhouse, barn, and corrals, formed a loose semicircle around the house, with cattle pens stretching beyond. Luke's ranch hands greeted them with curious but respectful nods as Luke helped Abigail down from his horse. Miguel, whom she recognized from his visits to check on her, approached to take Rusty's reins. "Everything quiet?" Luke asked him. "Sí, patron," Miguel replied. "No trouble while you were gone?" Luke nodded, placing a protective hand at the small of Abigail's back as he guided her toward the house. "This is Miss Zimmerman," he told Miguel. "She'll be staying with us for a while. Spread the word I want extra vigilance, especially toward the south where Wilson's property borders ours." Miguel nodded his understanding and led Rusty toward the barn. The interior of the main house was surprisingly comfortable, with solid wooden furniture, colorful woven rugs, and shelves lined with books. A massive stone fireplace dominated the main room, though it was cold now in the summer heat. "It's beautiful," Abigail said, taking in the evidence of Luke's success and good taste. "It's home," Luke replied simply. "Let me show you to your room." He led her upstairs to a bedroom at the end of the hallway, its windows offering a view of the mountains to the west. The room was plainly but comfortably furnished, with an iron frame bed covered in a colorful quilt, a simple dresser, and a washstand. "You'll be comfortable here, I hope," Luke said, setting down her small trunk. "The ranch cook, Hank, will have breakfast ready at sunrise, but I can bring you something now if you're hungry." Abigail shook her head, suddenly overwhelmed by the events of the night and the strange circumstance of finding herself in Luke's home. "I think I just need to rest," she said, her voice betraying her exhaustion. Luke nodded, understanding in his eyes. "Of course, I'll leave you to settle in." He moved toward the door, then paused, turning back to her. "Abigail, I meant what I said earlier. We'll figure this out together." After he left, Abigail sank onto the edge of the bed, her mind too full for sleep despite her bone-deep weariness. The kiss they had shared amid the ruins of her garden played over in her memory, a moment of sweetness amidst destruction. What did it mean for them now? And what would become of her home, her independence, the life she had been building for herself? Eventually, exhaustion overcame her whirling thoughts, and she fell into a deep, dreamless sleep. The next few days established a new routine for Abigail. She woke with the ranch, sharing breakfast with Luke and his hands in the large kitchen where Hank, a grizzled former cavalry cook, served hearty meals accompanied by endless cups of strong coffee. During the days, Luke attended to his ranch business while Abigail found ways to make herself useful, helping in the kitchen, tending to the small herb and vegetable garden behind the house, mending clothes that had been piled in a basket waiting for attention. The ranch hands were initially shy around her, but gradually accepted her presence, especially after she took over the task of patching their work clothes with far more skill than Hank had managed. In the evenings, she and Luke would sit on the porch, watching the sunset paint the mountains gold and purple while they talked of everything and nothing: their childhoods, their dreams, books they had read, places they hoped to see. Sometimes they simply sat in comfortable silence, content in each other's company. It was during one such evening, 5 days after Abigail's arrival at the Z-Bar Z, that Luke brought up the subject they had both been avoiding. "I rode out to your place today," he said, his voice carefully neutral. "Checked on things." Abigail straightened in her chair. "How bad is it?" "The coop is gone, of course, and part of the garden is burned, but the cabin itself is fine. No sign that anyone's been back since the fire." Abigail nodded, relief mingling with anxiety. "I need to go back, Luke." "I can't hide here forever." Luke's expression tightened. "It's not hiding, Abigail, it's being prudent until we can ensure your safety." "And how do we do that?" she asked. "Wilson won't simply give up. As long as those railroad rumors persist, he'll continue trying to drive me out." Luke was silent for a long moment, his gaze fixed on the darkening horizon. "I've been thinking about that," he finally said. "There might be a way to protect your property and give Wilson pause." "How?" Abigail asked, leaning forward eagerly. Luke turned to face her, his expression uncharacteristically uncertain. "It's not a perfect solution, and it would require a significant change for both of us," but he paused, seemed to gather his courage. "Marriage would legally bind your property to mine." Abigail's breath caught in her throat, shock rendering her momentarily speechless. Luke hurried on, misinterpreting her silence. "It's just a practical consideration, of course. Wilson wouldn't dare move against the Z-Bar Z. We're too well established, and I have too many allies in the territory. Your land would be protected under my name, though it would remain yours in every meaningful sense." "A marriage of convenience," Abigail said slowly, testing the words. Luke's eyes held hers, something vulnerable beneath his usual confidence. "It wouldn't have to remain that way," he said softly. "My feelings for you are real, Abigail. I think you know that. But I wouldn't expect anything from you that you weren't ready to give." Abigail's mind raced. The practical advantages were clear: her property would indeed be safer as part of the Z-Bar Z holdings. And her feelings for Luke had grown stronger with each day, each conversation, each shared moment. Yet marriage was not a step to be taken lightly, especially not in these circumstances. Was she ready to tie her life to his, to give up the independence she had fought so hard to establish? "I need time to think," she finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. Luke nodded, disappointment flashing briefly across his features before he masked it. "Of course, it's a big decision and there's no rush." He stood, offering her a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. "It's getting late. I should check on the night guard before turning in." After he left, Abigail remained on the porch, her thoughts in turmoil. Part of her wanted to run after him, to tell him yes immediately, to follow the dictates of her heart. But the practical part of her, the part that had survived her father's death and the journey west and all the challenges of frontier life, urged caution. She was still sitting there, watching the stars emerge in the vast Wyoming sky, when the sound of approaching riders broke the evening stillness. Luke appeared from the direction of the bunkhouse, rifle in hand, as 2 men rode into the yard. Abigail recognized Sheriff Thomas Davis from Clearwater, but the other man was a stranger well-dressed in a city suit that looked out of place in the dusty ranch yard. "Evening, Zander," the sheriff called. "Hope we're not interrupting your supper." "Not at all, Sheriff," Luke replied, lowering his rifle but not putting it aside. "What brings you out this way?" The sheriff dismounted, gesturing for his companion to do the same. "This is Mr. James Forrester from the Union Pacific Railroad. He's been asking about some land in these parts." Luke's posture tensed, though his expression remained neutral. "Is that so? And why would that bring you to the Z-Bar Z?" Forrester stepped forward, removing his hat. He was a lean man with shrewd eyes and the confident manner of someone accustomed to making deals. "Mr. Zander, I understand you might have information about a particular parcel. I'm interested in the old Harrington place." Abigail rose from her chair and moved to stand beside Luke, her decision crystallizing in that moment with unexpected clarity. "I'm Abigail Zimmerman," she said. "The Harrington place belongs to me." Forrester's eyebrows rose in surprise, then he smiled, extending his hand. "Miss Zimmerman, it's a pleasure. I've been trying to locate you for several days." "Why?" Abigail asked, not taking his hand. Forrester lowered his arm, unperturbed by her coolness. "Union Pacific is planning a spur line from Cheyenne to connect with the Northern Pacific. After extensive surveys, we've determined that the most viable route passes directly through your property." "I see," Abigail said, feeling Luke's solid presence beside her like an anchor, "and you wish to purchase my land." "We're prepared to make a very generous offer," Forrester confirmed. $1,500 for the full parcel. The amount was staggering 3 times what Wilson had offered, and more than enough for Abigail to return east in comfort, perhaps even restore some of the lifestyle she had known before her father's death. But the thought of leaving Wyoming, of leaving Luke, created a hollow ache in her chest that no amount of money could fill. "I appreciate your interest, Mr. Forrester," Abigail said, her voice steady, "but I'm afraid my property is not for sale." Forrester's expression registered surprise, then calculation. "Perhaps you don't understand the opportunity here, Miss Zimmerman. This is significantly more than the market value of your land." "I understand perfectly," Abigail replied, "but my decision stands." The railroad man looked from Abigail to Luke, noting their proximity. "I see," he said, a new understanding dawning in his eyes. "Well, in that case, perhaps we could discuss a right-of-way arrangement instead. The railroad would purchase a narrow corridor through your property, leaving the majority of it in your hands." Before Abigail could respond, Sheriff Davis cleared his throat. "There's something else you should know, Miss Zimmerman. Henry Wilson is in my jail." "What?" Luke asked sharply. "For what charge?" "Arson," the sheriff replied grimly. "One of his hired men came forward this morning, admitted that Wilson ordered him and several others to burn Miss Zimmerman's chicken coop as a warning. Said Wilson was planning worse if she didn't sell." A complex mix of emotions washed through Abigail: vindication, relief, and a lingering anger that Wilson had destroyed what she had worked so hard to build. "Will the charges stick?" Luke asked, his voice tight with controlled fury. Davis nodded. The man signed a sworn statement. And once he talked, 2 others came forward as well, afraid they'd be implicated. Wilson's looking at prison time. "Good," Luke said simply, his hand finding Abigail's and squeezing gently. Forrester, watching this exchange with interest, cleared his throat. "If I might return to the matter at hand, would you be willing to discuss a right-of-way arrangement, Miss Zimmerman? It would allow you to keep your home while still benefiting from the railroad's presence." Abigail looked up at Luke, seeing the question in his eyes. This was her decision, and he would support whatever choice she made. In that moment, with clarity born of crisis and unexpected opportunity, Abigail knew what she wanted. Her home, yes, the cabin and land she had fought for. But more than that, she wanted the future that had begun to take shape in her mind during these days at the Z-Z, a future with Luke. "I would be open to discussing a right-of-way," she told Forrester, "but any negotiations would need to include Mr. Zander as well." Forrester's eyebrows rose. "I don't understand. Does Mr. Zander have some legal interest in your property?" Abigail smiled, turning to Luke. "He will," she said softly, "if his offer still stands." Understanding dawned in Luke's eyes, followed by a joy so profound it transformed his face. "It does," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "Always." He turned to Forrester and the sheriff, who were watching this exchange with varying degrees of confusion and amusement. "Miss Zimmerman has done me the honor of agreeing to become my wife," Luke explained, his arm sliding around Abigail's waist. "Any business regarding her property will be conducted with both of us present." Forrester recovered quickly, a businessman's pragmatism overriding any romantic notions. "Congratulations to you both. I'll draw up a proposed right-of-way agreement for your review. Would tomorrow afternoon be convenient for me to return?" "The day after would be better," Luke replied. "We have some personal matters to attend to first." After the visitors departed, Luke and Abigail stood alone in the yard, the stars now fully emerged in the vast Wyoming sky. Luke turned to her, taking both her hands in his. "Did you mean it?" he asked, his eyes searching hers. Or was that just for Forrester's benefit? Abigail smiled, her heart full to bursting with certainty. I meant it, Luke. These past days here, seeing you in your home, understanding the life you've built, it's helped me see what I truly want, and that's a future with you. Luke's smile was like the sunrise, breaking over his face and illuminating his eyes with happiness. He drew her close, one hand cupping her cheek with exquisite tenderness. I love you, Abigail Zimmerman, he whispered. I think I've loved you since the moment I pulled you from that riverbank. And I love you, Abigail replied, the words coming easily, naturally, as if she'd been waiting her whole life to say them to him. My cowboy who said I've got you. Their lips met in a kiss that sealed their promise to each other, there beneath the endless Wyoming stars, with the land they both loved stretching out around them and the future they would build together just beginning to unfold. The wedding took place 2 weeks later, a simple ceremony in the Clearwater Church with the entire community in attendance. Abigail wore a dress of ivory silk that Luke had ordered from Cheyenne, delivered on the same train that brought the circuit judge who would perform the ceremony. Clara Wilson was notably absent, having left town shortly after her father's arrest. Rumors suggested she had gone to stay with relatives in Denver, unwilling to face the scandal of her father's crimes. After the ceremony, a celebration was held at the Z-Bar Z, with tables set up in the yard and lanterns hanging from the trees. There was music and dancing, food and laughter, as neighbors from miles around came to wish the couple well. As the evening deepened, Luke led Abigail away from the festivities to the small rise behind the main house, where they could look out over the ranch and, in the distance, the mountains silhouetted against the night sky. Happy? He asked, his arm around her waist, holding her close against the evening chill. Completely, Abigail replied, leaning into his warmth, though I still can't quite believe how much has changed in such a short time. 6 months ago, I was in Boston with no idea that Wyoming even existed in any meaningful way. Luke chuckled, the sound rumbling pleasantly against her side, and I was a confirmed bachelor with no plans to change that status. What changed your mind? Abigail asked, genuinely curious. Luke was quiet for a moment, considering. I think it was seeing how you faced each challenge, the isolation, the hard work, Wilson's threats. You never gave up, never stopped fighting for what was yours. He pressed a kiss to her temple. Your courage, your determination, they humbled me. And made me fall in love with you. Abigail turned in his arms, reaching up to touch his face. For me, it was your kindness. From that first day when you pulled me from the river, you've shown me nothing but respect and consideration. You offered help without making me feel weak for accepting it. Luke captured her hand, pressing a kiss to her palm. We make a good team, Mrs. Zander. The name, still new to her ears, sent a pleasant shiver through Abigail. We do indeed, Mr. Zander. In the days that followed, they settled into married life with surprising ease. The right-of-way agreement with the railroad was signed, providing them with a generous sum that they agreed to invest in expanding the ranch. Abigail's cabin was not demolished, but instead converted into a line shack for ranch hands working the eastern section of their now combined properties. By the following spring, the railroad construction had begun, bringing with it new opportunities for the ranch to supply beef to the work crews. The Z-Bar Z prospered, allowing Luke and Abigail to add more land to their holdings and increase their herd. One evening in late April, as they sat on their porch watching the sunset, Abigail placed Luke's hand over her still flat stomach. His eyes widened in understanding, then filled with wonder and joy. Really? He whispered, his voice catching. Abigail nodded, her own eyes bright with happy tears. Dr. Mitchell confirmed it yesterday. We'll welcome our child in late November. Luke gathered her into his arms, his kiss a mixture of tenderness and passion that still took Abigail's breath away, even after months of marriage. I never thought I could be this happy, he confessed against her hair. Never thought I deserved it. You deserve every happiness, Luke Zander, Abigail said firmly, and I intend to spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. Their son, Joshua Lucas Zander, was born on a snowy November evening with a healthy cry that announced his arrival to the world with unmistakable vigor. He had his father's blue eyes and his mother's determined chin, and from his earliest days displayed a curiosity about everything around him that kept his parents constantly on their toes. 2 years later, he was joined by a sister, Elizabeth, whose auburn curls and sweet disposition made her the darling of the ranch hands, each of whom considered himself her special protector. The railroad brought growth and change to the region, as Luke and Abigail had anticipated. Clearwater expanded into a proper town, with new businesses and settlers arriving on each train. The Z continued to prosper, becoming one of the most respected ranches in the territory. But through all the changes, through the challenges and triumphs that came with building a life on the frontier, Luke and Abigail remained each other's constant, their love deepening with each passing year. On warm summer evenings, they would often walk together to the small stream that marked the boundary between what had once been Abigail's land and the original Z. The banks were solid now, reinforced with stone to prevent the kind of erosion that had nearly claimed Abigail's life all those years ago. Yet they never forgot that day by the river, the moment when fate and circumstance had brought them together, when a crumbling riverbank and a cowboy's strong hand had set them on the path to finding each other. "I've got you," Luke would sometimes whisper in the quiet moments between them, an echo of those first words that had begun their story. And Abigail would smile, secure in the knowledge that they had indeed got each other for all the days of their lives.